We begin in Sudan, which has seen some of its heaviest fighting since the conflict began between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces, just hours after a one-day humanitarian ceasefire ended. Explosions, heavy gunfire and ground battles were reported in Khartoum and several other parts of the country. Hiba Morgan reports from Omdurman.
More artillery fire and explosions in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, just as a 24-hour ceasefire between the army and paramilitary rapid support forces came to an end on Sunday morning. The army quickly moved in to gain full control of a bridge that connects the city of Omdurman to the northern part of the capital.
We came here in the morning and they ran. I shot them with my Kalashnikov. Why are they running? Because we're here.
For its part, the RSF says it was able to repel attacks by the army in parts of Khartoum and destroy its vehicles.
A message to our commander. We're waiting for your orders and we will raid the general command of the army. We don't want any delays.
At times, residential areas in different parts of the capital turned into battlegrounds, with civilians caught in the middle. Army airstrikes were also reported around Khartoum. Artillery fire and shelling killed several civilians in the southern part of the capital on Sunday. Hundreds more have died since the start of the fighting in mid-April and thousands injured. But Khartoum is not the only region where violence has led to civilian casualties. In Jenaina, the capital of Sudan's West Darfur state, a region already devastated by 2 decades of war, saw the return of ethnic Arab militias backed by the rapid support forces targeting the ethnic Masalit tribe. Doctors in the state compared the violence there to the 1994 Rwandan genocide, calling it catastrophic. They say at least 1,000 civilians have been killed since the start of the fighting 8 weeks ago and hundreds injured. Hospitals have ceased functioning, while thousands have fled to neighboring Chad for safety. But thousands more remain behind, trapped in a decades-long ethnic conflict made worse by the recent fighting. Hiba Morgan, Al Jazeera, Omdurman.
Well, as Hiba mentioned there, thousands of people are fleeing the violence in Western Darfur. They're escaping into neighbouring Chad. Zain Basravi has more from Adre in eastern Chad.
This is a place where aid organizations are poised to try to deal with this enormous humanitarian catastrophe that hour by hour, day by day, just keeps getting worse. We've been speaking to refugees that have been pouring in from West Darfur. We can surmise from the uptick of people that have been coming in that there has been a lull in the fighting that is allowed for people to try to get out. But as soon as they arrive here, they tell us that ongoing fighting, skirmishes, gun battles, street-to-street battles, those are still continuing in El Jenaina city. Everyone we've been speaking to says the same thing, that they are being targeted by Arab militias, that those of the African Masalit tribe often have to lie about who they are to try to get through checkpoints where they have to pay for their freedom, where they are robbed of their cell phones and almost entirely all of their property, where they are experiencing severe beatings, men, women, children. No one is being spared the indignities of those checkpoints. And despite that, they feel lucky to get out because they say not everybody does. We've spoken to multiple people who have had relatives killed, who have been split up from their families, who don't know where the rest of their groups are because during their journey, they faced gunfire, they faced attacks by militias, and they were split up, running into forests, getting out any way that they could.
Well, regional leaders are gathering in Djibouti to push for a ceasefire in Sudan. Bernard Smith has the latest from Djibouti.
The leaders of 7 East African nations will meet here in Djibouti on Monday, and the top of their agenda is going to be Sudan and the conflict and the fighting there. But ahead of that, the leaders of Djibouti and Kenya have already met on a bilateral meeting. William Ruto, the Kenyan president, he said that the situation in Sudan is bad and getting worse and more complicated, and the leaders of IGAD, this East African Union, must put an end to this war. And the president of Djibouti, Ismail Gwella, he said, we demand an end to the suffering of the Sudanese and we will work with regional leaders to put an end to that suffering. But the challenge for these leaders is what leverage can they bring to bear on the two warring factions in Sudan? Many ceasefires have not held. There was one for 24 hours that just about held, negotiated by the US and Saudi Arabia. Can the leaders of these East African countries do something similar? They need to, because there's already 1.9 million people internally displaced by the fighting in Sudan, many coming across the porous borders into those neighbouring countries. It's a crisis for these countries too, and they need to bring a solution to the fighting in Sudan. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Djibouti.